Where should we be looking for inspiration when improving service in our firms? Now, if you've been listening for a while, you know I've spent a lot of time talking about my time with the Four Seasons hotels. But of course, it's not the only place you can get high-end experiences. This week, we're bringing you a conversation between me and Ernie Svenson, otherwise known as Ernie the Attorney. After Ernie spent the first part of his career as a commercial litigator in a large New Orleans firm, he left in 2006 to start a low-overhead, paperless solo practice. In 2009, he created Law Firm Autopilot and made helping his lawyers build their own practices his full-time mission. But before he became Ernie the Attorney, he was Ernie the Waiter at Commander's Palace in New Orleans. Commander's Palace is one of my favorite restaurants, and he and I talk about the things that happened there and the things that we can take into our own practices, in how we structure things and how we can make it easy for owners, employees, and guests to get the best service possible. It's a lot of fun, so let's get to that conversation. I'm John Strohmeyer, and this is the 5-Star Counsel Podcast. The market for legal services is shifting, and lawyers who don't adapt will be left behind. This podcast gives you a competitive edge in today's market by sharing the client service lessons you probably didn't learn in law school or in law practice. Let's start the show. Hey 5-Star listeners, before we start, I want to tell you about our amazing sponsor, Smith AI. Smith AI is a virtual receptionist service for small businesses with a specialty in working with solo and small law firms. I signed up with them within weeks of starting my firm because they are affordable for even the smallest solo practice. Their friendly receptionists respond to potential clients in Spanish or English, screen and schedule new leads, and can even take payments. And now they're answering calls 24 hours a day. So even when you're asleep, they're still working. Even beyond the phone, they've got live agents and chatbots ready to capture leads on your website, by text, and by Facebook Messenger. Smith's friendly gatekeepers can staff your front line so you can work uninterrupted. You can finally have the peace of mind that while you're working, you're not missing out on future work. Plans start at just $70 a month for calls and $100 a month for chats. Smith AI is offering a free trial, and our podcast listeners get an extra $100 discount code with promo code 5STAR. That's FIVESTAR. Sign up and learn more at www.smith.ai. Don't let another day go by. Try Smith AI.
All right, John, I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Oh, Ernie, I'm glad that we finally get to record this chat instead of, wasting it all on the air between the two of us.
Yeah, we'll get to see what we say. We'll maybe even have a transcript. So let me set this up by saying that the way that we were introduced to one another was through Maddie Martin of Smith AI, whom we both have high regard for and like a lot as a person. And she said, you two guys should talk. And the reason she told me we should talk was mainly because she had an experience in the restaurant industry. I guess she was a chef, and she found out I worked at Commander's Palace, and that I thought that experience of working in a fine restaurant in New Orleans, Commander's Palace being one of the premier ones, she said, well, who else, had that kind of experience as a lawyer is John Strohmeyer, except his experience was with a hotel. And she said, so you guys should talk, bottom line. So we did. And we started realizing, well, we should record this conversation. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. There are so few attorneys who have had, one meaningful work experience before law school, but even beyond that, just the things that we learned as a day-to-day, how to exist in a fine dining, fine hotel business. There's just so many little things you don't pick up on, and it's so important that what most lawyers miss and most people miss about service is they just see the veneer of like, this is just how stuff got to you.
Right.
But it's not everything that goes into getting that to you.
Right. And because we're going to use this recording for both of our respective podcasts, I'll use this opportunity to say to my audience that the name of your podcast reflects this idea of coming at customer service. The name of your podcast is the 5-Star Client. Is that right?
5-Star Counsel. So here we're gonna figure out, answering the question, what would a law firm built by the founders of Four Seasons, Amazon, and Zappos look like, or Disney? And maybe I should just toss in Commander's Palace too.
Yes, definitely. All right, so that was your kind of frame of reference in creating the podcast. So tell me a little bit about, because we didn't discuss this in our prior conversation. This is truly something I want to know, and we'll hear about for the first time. How did you make that connection with that background? And well, there needs to be a podcast with that frame of reference.
So, yeah, obviously it started, my first career was 4 years in management with Four Seasons Hotel. 3 of those years were as the night manager of the Austin property. So I'd show up, 11 o'clock at night. I'd leave 8:30 or 9 in the morning, Tuesday through Saturdays. I did that for 4 years. Then I went to law school. In law school, I thought I was going to go do intellectual property. I could sit for the patent bar. I realized I didn't like IP law. I did like tax, and kind of worming my way through law school and taking a bunch of different classes, I settled on estate planning. And I thought, oh, this is great. I get to take care of people. The tax problems are fun. There's no litigation, which suits how I want to do things. I just want to resolve it and be done. And it was slowly over the kind of the years of working and seeing, oh, there are all these connections. I just assumed, oh, what I learned in the hotel that's behind me, sadly, I may have some good stories, but I'm going to leave most of it behind. What I really found, though, is the connection of there are things we should be picking up on service. The problem is I would hear from other lawyers, the partners I would work for, people intending well, but just missing the mark of, hey, sir, high-end service means this. And I'd say, well, that's not really it.
Mm-hmm.
And the real key point to remember is when it comes to services, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, your barber, they're getting paid to get something done for you in a way that Four Seasons, Disney, Commander's Palace, you're going there for some combination of entertainment, pampering, and fun. And they're just totally different. You'd happily go to any of those last 3 on a Saturday, but you don't want to spend any time with your lawyer if you can avoid it.
True. Yeah. And while you can't make yourself something that people want to save up money to go do with their family as a lawyer, you can make the experience a lot better. And I guess like you, I didn't think that my experience working at Commanders was going to translate in any way. And then over time, I realized that, well, why are these other lawyers who are smart, well-educated, motivated, disciplined, all that good stuff, what is it that they're not quite doing that's felt natural to me? Like, for example, one of those things is systems. Like, why don't you break things down and have systems? Why don't you map out or understand what's likely to occur and have systems to help you deal with that? Like, that's, I went to work at a big firm, and if they had systems, it was through just the progression of people getting used to doing things in a certain way. And a lot of it depended on paralegals and secretaries. Everybody just kind of knew what to do. But then as technology came in and things shifted to digital, and now people had to be intentional about those systems, they couldn't, because that skill of thinking about, well, how can I make this work better, wasn't something that the lawyer brains, of the people around me seemed to have. That was my awareness. Like, wait a second, every restaurant has systems, and
right.
every hotel has systems, and they're crucial, right?
Right. I mean, here it is 2022. I left the hotel January of 2006. So I have not been employed by the Four Seasons in over 16 years. I still remember more or less the 23 things I had to do to check somebody in. Why? Because it got drilled into me day in and day out. You do, 40 or 50 check-ins on a busy day, more on a really busy day if you were on, but you'd get tested on this. You'd be evaluated by other managers, employees who are just sitting there and say, hey, I think you missed this. And this is where lawyers, I would typically get the most pushback from partners. Well, that's fine. It's a hotel. It doesn't really matter. But the big thing was, well, no, it provided this framework. It said, look, when somebody walks in to check in, the first thing you're going to do is smile. I mean, who doesn't want to do that? Smile at the person in front of you, kind of welcome them using one of these, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever's appropriate. when they give you the reservation, confirm their name, confirm the number of nights, do a few certain things to make sure you've got the right answer for them. There are also certain things you don't do, like never vocalize their room number. Why? That's a security issue. Also, never ask how many keys they want, because again, that's a security issue. You always give everybody 2 keys unless they ask for more, just because you don't want to identify this person is traveling alone for somebody who may be there. It's just those sort of little things that you get drilled into you. And it's good because, one, you know what to do next. If you get stuck, you should have that right there. And we had the list always pretty close at hand. But it provides the framework when something goes off the rails. All right, well, and even off the rails could be different. It doesn't mean things are bad. It's just not the normal course. Oh, this person is asking about where to eat now. Great. I will tell them. I'll remember that that's sooner than I would have told them where to get something to eat, which is the second to last thing that you do. Or if they did say, well, hey, how do I send a fax? Because when I was there, you did still send faxes. You would know where to come back so you didn't miss anything. And that was the real thing. It's just the checklist to make sure you don't drop the ball.
Right. Yeah, that's a huge thing. I didn't understand that was being inculcated into me at the restaurant. And I guess one difference probably with going to work at a place like Commanders versus the Four Seasons is at Commanders, they don't have time to give you a checklist and have you go to meetings. Like nobody went to meetings much, it was like hit the ground running, there's the floor, try to keep up, don't get in anybody's way. If you spill something, pick it up. I mean, I didn't really know what the rules were. I had to like figure them out. And there's a lot of turnover, probably a lot more turnover in Commanders or a restaurant than there is in a hotel. But if you survive that first cut, then you hang around, you start to go, whoa, everything here has a system. Like I remember looking at they'd say, okay, write down each person, number 1, 2, 3, 4, however many you're sitting at the table, and go clockwise on the ticket. And then as they order, you'd write their order next to the number, but you would circle the women. And so the first time I could circle the women, why am I circling the women? And then I realized when food is brought out, everything would stop and every waiter who wasn't doing something in that room would go over to immediately bring the food to the table, because of course, it's not a question of like, well, this is your table, that's your, it's get the food out to the place it needs to go as quickly as possible. But the people who hadn't been dealing with the table wouldn't know what to bring where, except they did, because it was a system. Grab all the ones with circles first, everybody bring those out together, put them in front of the women, approaching from the right, all these little things about how you unveil the food. And if you're pouring soup, you pour it away from the person so you don't spill it on them by pouring it. Like all these little things that I, as a college student who's like oblivious to so many things, over time, I became hyper aware of a bunch of little things that mattered in that world. And then I took that with me without knowing it to practicing law, like the keen sense of paying attention to a lot of things at once and knowing what to make of that information. That was kind of what translated.
No, and I mean, it was fun a few years ago. Oh, I guess it was 2018 or so, when Cleo was in New Orleans. I went with a few of people, including Jess Birkin and Megan Xavier, for dinner one night, and I hadn't been since before I'd worked at the Four Seasons, and going for the first time in decade or more, sitting down and watching things happen. It was interesting. And I just started pointing things out. It's like, oh, did you see that? And it flies by smart people who are normally paying attention. But, I just remember I guess he was head waiter. I'm sure there's a term for server assistant, something like that. But he came out, he gave us the initial, who's been here, or no, kind of who's been here, what do you need to know, the initial welcome. And he just did this very subtle thing that it's hard to translate because I'm using my hands right now and people are just listening to us. But he just ever so slightly moved the salt and pepper shakers from being at opposite ends of the centerpiece to being right next to each other. And you're nodding along. And then he just kind of walked away. And I remember mentioning that to the folks at the table. And it's like, oh, did you see that? And they're like, see what? It's like, well, the salt and pepper shakers. Do you think he did that on purpose? or was there a reason for it?
Mm.
I don't know. Maybe he's nervous energy or something. No. And, he came back, and the kind of the fun part was at a certain point, I just started peppering him with questions about like, what do the balloons mean? What do the blue ribbons mean? And Jess and Megan kind of looked around. I was like, oh, that's not just random for those tables. No, what the blue ribbons mean, it's a return guest, and the balloons they're celebrating something. It was something like that.
Right. Yeah, no, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. And yeah, it really is marvelous. I mean, and I think that it's important, not just kind of for the ceremony and the panache of it or any of that kind of thing. It really is important when you understand that these institutions not only could not function at all, but they definitely could not function at that high level unless they have coordination among all these different people. And I guess the big insight for me is, if restaurants can do this, and they all do it to some extent. I mean, the ones that are more high end, do more of it and have more things that they pay attention to. Same with hotels, but they all do it. They all have systems. And then you look at a lot of law firms or professional services businesses, it's almost like, oh, we don't really need that. We have our systems for us, how we get the mail and we do things internally, but we don't really think too much about systems for the clients or the prospective clients. And the more I started studying marketing, the more I realized that good businesses, and especially with marketing, do pay attention to that. And one of the first times that kind of came up is I was listening to somebody talk about how do you get people to say yes when you're meeting prospective clients. And so let's say, you have your estate planning business, somebody's going to come in, they're wondering if they're going to hire you, you're hoping they will, you have to do some discussion. Well, you can orchestrate this. You could have the person at the front desk, this is what the person's explaining to people, say, are you here to meet John Strohmeyer? Instead of, why are you here? You know what I mean? Like, right. So they go, yes. Oh, well, he will be with you in just a few minutes. Would you like some water, some coffee? No, that's fine. Okay. And then, you come out and you're like, oh, are you having a nice day? So they'd say you want to ask them questions to which they are saying yes, and put them in a good mood. Wow. Like, this is orchestrating the likelihood that they're going to hire you. Like, why doesn't every lawyer know about this?
Yeah. I mean, so much of it is, and what I kind of remind my staff about so frequently is, show them that we've been paying attention. Here, these are clients who are paying us a lot of money. Don't ask them the same question twice. If we already know something, show them that we know it. And it came up with somebody who, look, we're updating some documents for one family. They've had a change in heart and who the guardians for their kids should be. And my associate was like, oh, I'll just go confirm the names. It's like, wait, I know we've got the names. I know that these were clients at my last firm, and so we don't have all of their documents. Before we go ask, let me just ask, or let me go through and see if I can't pull it out of my notes, so that we don't have to ask and look a little foolish of, ooh, who was this person? And that's the point. It's just, again, it's always about making it easy,
right?
Which the distinction I always want to drive home to lawyers is, you're making it easy. It's not about showering people with gifts, which is one of those other things. Like, well, Disney will give me this, or I'll go to the restaurant and we'll get a little free something there. Like, you're not going for the free stuff. You're going for the result.
Right.
And the fact that, look, it's easy for you to be served at Commander's. It's easy for you to get room service at half an hour or less at Four Seasons. Whatever it is, that's part of it, but it's not, it's not the little free things here and there.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about marketing, because one of the things that I learned at Commanders, again, not realizing that this was a thing, was they spent a lot of money on advertising. If you get off a plane at the airport, you see ads for Commanders, you see them on the side of buses, in the usual places, you see these ads plastered all over the place. So they obviously spend a lot of money getting the name out there, even though their name is pretty well known. But where you don't see them marketing, but this is, in fact, is probably the most important marketing, is how they treat their customers when they come in. So, we would give them free garlic bread when they came in. That was like part of the deal. And then the garlic bread didn't have a long half-life. So you ate it quickly or it became stale. Some people wouldn't eat it quickly. And then they'd say, oh, the garlic bread, could you bring me some more? Now, the correct answer to this is, oh, yes, absolutely, right away. Not sighing, rolling your eyes, or, oh my God, I get, like you just do it, and you do it with a smile on your face. And then, if they wanted more, whatever they wanted, you give it to them. And even to the point where if somebody ordered something, not that just was bad, because if it's bad, it doesn't suit their taste, whatever, you bring it back, you fix that problem. That's obvious. But sometimes they would say, I ordered this because I thought I would like it, but I really have decided I want something else. And they would even say, and I know you're going to have to charge me for that. And I'd say, no, we don't charge you for that. That's fine. That's a marketing cost. What's our food cost? It's not that big. It's way less than the buses and the ads, and like, make them happy in whatever way you can. Surprise them, delight them. That is the cheapest marketing that you can do. And that is what they did. And they could have done it differently. They could have had an attitude. So, well, we're Commander's Palace. Right. We're great. We know we're great. I'm sorry. Yes, we're going to have to charge you for that meal that you decided you wanted that you didn't want before. But that's not how it works in the high-end hospitality industry, is it?
Right. And I mean, I want to pull out the part of the surprise and delight. People like this, and the surprise and delight is never anything that's expensive. Like, you didn't give them a free meal.
Mm-hmm.
You just ate the cost of the raw goods,
mm-hmm.
which it's not nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the time of the cooks and everybody else. But again, it's not nothing, but they were going to be there anyway. They were going to have to do that sort of thing.
Right.
And it was the same thing at the hotel. We were told, again, just make people happy. We can sort it out on the back end later, but take care of them right now. If we need to talk to you about you giving away too much, we'll have that conversation. But you were never in trouble for taking care of somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And you were never in trouble for just saying, look, send them to the lobby lounge and tell them to grab a drink and some appetizers, send them to dinner and just cover it.
Yep.
I can remember one Saturday morning in the hotel, it was the don't do this. Of course you were courting disaster, but I had packed up my bank. I'd counted all my money. I was kind of getting ready to walk out, and the front desk phone rang, and there was a front desk agent who was been there since 6:30, and it was 8:30 in the morning. The phone rang, and then the second line rang at the same time. So it's like, all right, the two of us are here. She'll pick up one line, I'll pick up the other. And I picked up the line, and it was somebody who was frantically trying to get into a room. They couldn't get in. And then, I looked over and I saw the other agent who was like, I don't know what's going, she'd covered the line. It's like, I don't know what's going on, but it's bad. And it turned out, a woman had jumped off the railing of her balcony, jumped off her balcony, landed on the balcony on the main terrace below her, really had just kind of cut herself and then kind of banged her way through, run through the thing. She had gotten back upstairs, had her cell phone, called me because she had barricaded the door and couldn't get in.
Uh-oh.
And, the folks who were in the high-end suite were like, we don't know what, they were a little just shell-shocked. What do we do? Well, I mean, again, it was easy. Like, we're very sorry, folks. You go down to the restaurant. We'll take care, we will sort this out. It's still shocking to me. Here it is 15 whatever years later. Those folks were fine. They understood, look, things happen, women falling out of the sky and landing on your terrace. That is not a normal occurrence anywhere.
Right.
But just kind of give them a chance to get out of the way, like ply them with some food. Security went and kind of worked with the troubled other woman and figured out what to do with her. But it was just, marketing cost. And it was the recovery for things that we made it easy. Like, how are you not going to, how are you ever going to prepare for that other than, oh my God, just take care of them?
Right. Yeah. That idea of just like, do whatever you can to fix the problem the best you can, the fastest you can. And people pick up on that. And that's really what they need to see first, as opposed to, oh, well, I don't know, let me check with my authority figures. But that nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear that you're working on the problem right away. If you need to check with authorities, go back and check with authorities. But the face should say, I'm working on it. I'm here to, please you and do whatever I need to do. So I want to talk about two other things, one of which is this idea of maintaining a certain face in the face of turmoil. And the other one is answering questions in a way that puts people at ease. And I'll start with the second one first. So one of the things, again, this is like in the practice a lot, I was like, I can see when somebody has a face that tells me they don't quite know enough about what I'm saying. Like I learned to be tuned into that at Commanders, because if I'd say, oh, here's some coffee, would you like chicory coffee? And they look like chicory, or they just make a look, and I know, oh, they don't know what chicory is. Here comes the question: what is chicory? And then I'd have to find a way to explain it. At first, I tried one way, and then ultimately, I learned that people were embarrassed that they didn't know. So I would make it clear, like, most people don't know. I didn't even know, when I came to work here. I just, so that people get the question answered and also are put at ease. Those things go hand in hand. And I didn't know that I had learned that at Commander's Palace, but I would talk to people about taking a deposition or anything. I could see, oh, you're worried about a lot of things. Well, let's talk about those things. And then I would explain it in a way that not just gave them the information, but also made them feel like you don't need to feel stupid or awkward about this. This is an unusual event that everybody feels awkward about, including me when I went to work there, for the judge as an attorney, and that little extra bit of information is part of the explanation to me.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's ultimately, how are you taking care of it? And I forget where I heard this, but the difference between a professional and a technician is the professional cares about the client or the guest or the customer. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those differentiating factors. How are we taking care of them? We're putting them at ease, comforting them through the learning process. And I've had a client meeting this morning. It ran for almost 2.5 hours. And I probably spent half an hour, almost 45 minutes, just going through, here are the calculations for the estate tax. And it's complicated. I have been doing this for well over a decade, and I can rattle it off. My associate has worked with me, both as a lawyer and a law student, for almost 3 years at this point. She kind of knows it, but even then, it's going back and saying, I understand this is complicated. I will run the numbers very quickly in front of you. Mm-hmm. I understand if you're not going to get it, I'm going to round it off, but the point is to get you in the ballpark so you can see what this is. When I look at your numbers, this is what I'm afraid of. Mm-hmm. And you didn't think you were in trouble. You're not ultimately going to be in trouble. But yes, I understand this is complicated, realizing, acknowledging, yes, I can rattle this off, but it's not because it's easy. It's because I've worked hard, right, and I'm the expert who knows what to do.
Right. So you mentioned that you had your lawyer who used to be a law student. And I remember we talked about this, and I will come back to the thing about the face, but I want to touch on this. We talked about how you take people in and they work for you. They work no matter where they start. If they're going to be a lawyer, they have to do the paralegal work. Tell us a little bit about that.
So this is something I'm, always iterating on it, building it out. I've got the law student who worked for me for 2 years. She started full-time lawyering last fall. I've got a 3L who is graduating as we record this in a week or two. We'll go take the bar and we'll start full-time September, October. She's worked for me for 6-8 months at this point. And so we've got a new law student coming in second half of the summer. He'll work full-time until it's time for school, and then he'll do about 10 hours a week. The law student who is going to be the full-time lawyer, her job that first year really is going to be being a paralegal. She'll have her, lawyer designation. Doesn't mean she won't get to do some fun lawyer things. Like, after 3 or 4 months, we'll let her go to hearings with other attorneys just to make sure she's fine. But, most of it is stuff she can do, but she has got to understand how the pieces get put together. We have document automation for wills and trusts, and soon other pieces of what we do, but we're putting her through. You've got to draft the documents the old way that we did it, which is still find and replace. It's easier than the way it was at prior firms where you'd have 17 documents and you were, replacing underlines or underscores
Right.
with things. But the reason we're doing that is you've just got to see how these forms get pulled together. And if you can't, like, if you haven't put it all together and see how it works on the ground level, you're not going to see the opportunities when you're there with a client and they say, well, we've got 5 kids and 3 of them get along and the other 2 are off in la la land.
Mhm.
You've got to know, well, how do your tools work before you just start, banging away with the hammer.
Right. Yeah, that really hit home to me because when I went to work at the big firm, and of course they had paralegals, and of course the paralegals knew how to do things that the lawyers didn't know how to do. And I wasn't expected to know how to do those things. I still wanted to do them. One, because I had just finished a 2-year clerkship for a judge who was very systematic and actually had a manual written out. And he it was like a continuation of my experience at Commanders. And so that was another reason I was misled into thinking that this is how it worked everywhere in the legal profession. But, he said when I showed up and he, decided to hire me, he's like, look, let me tell you something. That secretary over there, that's my secretary. There's a typewriter in your office. If you don't know how to type, you're going to learn, and you're going to make copies, and you're going to do all these things that you might consider to be beneath you, but that's part of the job. And I just assumed, okay, fine, it's part of the job, and I did it. But then I learned that, like, doing that stuff, I guess it's like Mr. Miyagi with the Karate Kid. You think you want to learn karate, but you first need to learn the basics. And really, when you learn the basics, you've learned most of what you need. The rest of it is then putting that into effect. But if you don't learn the basics, in a lot of cases at the big firm, you get these people who are arrogant. They would command people to do things in a certain way, and those people were trying. They weren't receiving the right instruction. They weren't receiving empathy. There's all kinds of things went wrong because the lawyer simply didn't know how the sausage was made, basically.
Right. And I think back the first week or so, I was working as an attorney in my first firm, and the partner said, all right, go write a fax to the trustee in Liechtenstein and tell them we need to do blah, 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 blah. And I was like, got it, boss. And I went back to my office and I was like, looked at my computer and looked at my notepad and realized, wait, I'd gone to college, gone to law school, run a hotel, and I didn't know how to put together a 4-sentence fax to a trustee. Right. And I remember walking across the hall to one of the paralegals and saying, I am so confused. What do I even do? And she's like, this is okay. Now just sit down. And, what was sentence 1 that we had to ask? Oh, okay. Well, this is how we do it. It's blindly, just blindingly obvious. But the mechanics of it, nobody bothered to sit me down and say, when you write a fax, it means open this document
right,
and start typing here.
Right. Yeah, it's astonishing to me because I used to think about, like, when I had the temerity to not so much ask, but like just kind of posit, the question of, like, well, why wouldn't we teach people these kinds of things? And then I'd get these lofty guffaws of like, oh, that's beneath us. That's plumbing. We're engineers. And I was thinking, okay, that seems weird. And then I thought about it. And the first analogy that it came up was these same, and it's a male dominated bastion, these male dominated alpha male people who would say those kinds of things would also then express their admiration for a football coach like Bill Belichick, who was all about the process and the X's and O's and the repetitions. And they all understood that in sports, that matters. Tiger Woods worries about his grip, like that wasn't beneath anybody else in these high performing areas, but somehow in the lawyer world, because we were cerebral, that was beneath us. And I was just astonished.
Yeah, I mean, it's just what we do is so esoteric, and no 2 clients are ever the same. I'm like, well, no 2 golf shots are ever the same. No 2,
right.
No 2 pass plays are ever the same.
Right.
Yes, you kind of revert to your lowest level of training.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. We get 0 training. after the first firm, I remember going to the second and third and saying, hey, are there some good documents I can look at? I mean, they don't have to be perfect, but things you've done recently.
Right.
And I mean, especially just thinking, like, nobody wanted to hand that over
Right.
because they were too busy and, oh, you'll learn it as you do it. It's like, well, give me something to at least baseline off of.
Right. Right.
So I know this is what was good and this is what you did and didn't like.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was going to go take my first deposition, the partner I worked with, who was a tremendous lawyer. I'm very glad I got to work with him just because I got to be close enough to watch somebody who was good. And that was, good enough. But I asked him one time, I'm going to go take a deposition. I knew what depositions were. I had, read them a million times working for the judge. I understood a lot of things about depositions that you wouldn't understand if you were just getting out of law school. But still, I thought to myself, well, he must have some pointers or some little things that he's figured out that he would want me to know if I just took the time to ask. And so I was getting ready to take the first deposition. I came to his office. I said, listen, just by the way, is there anything special I should know about taking a deposition? He goes, yes. He goes, ask lots of questions. And then he turned back like, like this, like just figure
Nailed
it out. Yeah, thank you. That was the one that had escaped me. I didn't get the part about asking lots of questions. And yeah, so there's like, I think that a lot of it was trial by fire. That's how they had learned it, but it's not a good way to run anything, including a law firm. So let's talk about, I mentioned earlier, the face you wear. And you talked about when, put a smile on when people approach, but then there could be a problem and you pick up the phone. I'm sure you learned the same thing, which was like, no matter what's going wrong, your face should not contort into a look of consternation. Your face should always project confidence. Inside your brain, you might be scrambling, but you learn to disconnect those two things. And that's hugely valuable for lawyers.
It is. And there's also what I don't want to have come across is I think it's totally fine and probably very appropriate many times for you to share the emotions of your clients.
Right.
I was thinking, working with one of my outside litigators, because I don't do any litigation, they'll send me things and like, hey, what do we do with this? And there's one thing that's been going on and a trustee just refuses to give us a straight answer. And I think it's mostly because they don't know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember being really mad for them and kind of trying to contain myself, even just in an email, and just say, look, this is where you should kind of unleash your fury on this person. Mm-hmm. Because at some point, a trustee who I think is the person you're talking to is going to have to fill out this tax return. Mm-hmm. Specifically, they're going to have to fill it out under penalties of perjury, and they're going to have to fill in this line. How are they going to fill in this line with this weirdo tax number that I keep asking for? Mm-hmm. And so I know how to answer it, but yes, I know how to do this, but I also want them to understand exactly how infuriating they're being.
Right.
Not my litigators, but the team on the other side, because if I can help them understand how much of a problem this is going to be for our client later on, 40% of whatever they might receive disappears. Mm-hmm. That helps them. And so, yes, we always started, again, the Four Seasons, everything started with a smile. Why? Assume a good result. As you were saying earlier, we always don't say no, say yes.
Right.
Yes. Right. And
right.
I understand what you're saying, but no, we can't fill up the bathtub with Pepto-Bismol on this short of notice.
Is that an actual request?
No, that one was not a specific request, but it could have happened. There were some weird requests. Yeah. Too hot for podcast land, but there were, just, yes, I understand. And right. Here's a reasonable alternative.
Right.
Again, you're there on their side.
Yeah. No, and that's good that you flesh that out, because I'm not saying that you shouldn't have emotions, but you should know how to manage them. And so part of it is, if you're going to get angry, that's another one. Like, now that didn't come up in my waiter world, because I rarely was called upon to get angry, with any kind of, that wouldn't serve any purpose in the restaurant world. But unless it was at somebody, a coworker or something. But as a lawyer, you sometimes are met with unreasonable requests, but I always started with the presumption that people were acting for a good reason, right? Because if you get off on the wrong foot and then there's a misunderstanding, now you've torpedoed something that was going to turn out well if you hadn't torpedoed it. So don't get angry before you need to. But if you need to get angry, then get angry in control, not like, oh my God, my emotions are boiling, but rather I'm being very emphatic and expressing anger, but only so that you understand my level of emphasis. That's usually something that would come up with other lawyers because they would do things that were, untoward.
Yeah, now I'm trying to figure out, oh, there's so many threads to pull on there, but it really is, how can we be productive for our clients? Is it going to serve, or are we just lashing out? Because that, how many times does it say, well, the client has hired us to be the in control professional to help them achieve some result. And if we, blow up, explode, whatever it is that going to help the client achieve their goal?
Right. And to the point of confidence, I will say as well that I learned on my own, because I felt like I was being told, never let the client know that you don't know the answer. Like, always project that you know the answer. And I thought, well, I don't know the answer a lot of the times. And when I worked for the judge, he didn't expect me to say I knew the answer if I didn't. He would rather me and he would find out right away if I didn't. So I felt like, no, you can tell people you don't know, and that's okay. And then I watched the aforementioned attorney that I worked with, and he would say in court, sometimes a judge would ask him very pointedly, what's the answer to this? And he'd say, I don't know, and he wouldn't follow it up with, yeah, but I'll get back to you. And I learned that that didn't carry any weight. My judge wasn't excited that people were going to get back to him. Just tell me you don't know, let's move on. If I want you to get back to me, I'll tell you. So learning how to deal with all these little moments where there's potentially tension, there are you can't just use one or two responses. You have to pay attention to what's really happening in front of you, most importantly, and address that, but address it ideally with confidence. But if you don't know, say you don't know, and people will accept the truth. I guess that was like a thing I learned. Like, you could even be vulnerable as an attorney up to a point. Not, I'm here to cry and tell you my problem's vulnerable, but rather, yeah, I'm in a jam here, I don't really know what to do, help me out. And people will help you out if you say that's the reason. But if you try to pretend nothing's going wrong and it's their fault, then they don't want to help you out.
Oh, exactly. I mean, everybody who works for me knows that they can always pawn off any question to me. Obviously, if I hear the same sort of questions multiple times, and like, you should know this answer by now. But so many of the questions are the same simple things that it just comes up again and again because we're a focused practice, which obviously helps. They're not jumping from criminal defense to family law to, M&A. It helps them build the knowledge and start seeing the connections. But the other side is going through and thinking about, when you see this situation, these are appropriate responses. And you're going to see different situations. That's okay. I expect you to see different things. Right. We're going to have different clients. Just gaming out, this is what it looks like for you.
So here's one that also in the restaurant world, I was kind of surprised when I encountered this, and I don't know how much this comes into play in the hotel world, but in the restaurant world, you got to turn the tables. Like, there's two seatings. It's a busy restaurant. Yes, we're here to pamper our guests, but we also need to get that table clear because another group of people have that table reserved. And so you have to learn to manage the situation where people are lingering, where they're not paying the bill. Anything where you start to detect in the first seating, second seating, they can stay as long as they want to, but the first seating, you have to clear those tables. And then I learned you have to be forceful in a certain kind of way. And that threw me off, because I was like, well, wait a minute, I'm just some kid in college learning this. Like, who am I to be hustling people who are, have high level jobs and make a lot of money and operate at a much higher level than me? How am I going to get them to move along? But this is where I learned practical psychology, which I would never have learned at Tulane, taking a psychology class. So that, but you learn, like, you can get people to do things if you go about it in the right way.
Yeah. So much of it is just those soft skills. Again, lawyers aren't great at them.
No.
We're good at the technical skills of signing documents and negotiating around things,
Right.
but will you please, or I think this is what you're looking for. How can we help you get what you wanted done?
Right. But it is important. I mean, I think it should be covered because it's part of persuasion and negotiation. And for sure, all of the persuasion and negotiation are so much a part of every job, but for sure they're part of the law world. And so if you don't understand what is it that's going to make people more inclined or less inclined to do something. So resistance, once you trigger resistance, you have a much harder job than if you didn't trigger resistance. That's, start there. And then how do you entice people? What kinds of things can you say to people? What kind of language can you use? And the exact phrasing of words, common phrases, matters a lot. Like I heard this bartender, and see, again, we pay attention to these things when we're sitting there. This bartender comes up to a guy sitting next to me. It's really busy. And the guy finally gets his turn to talk to the bartender. The bartender says, with a smile on his face, of course, very cheerfully, "So what are we having?" And I thought, what an interesting term. Not what are you having? What are we having? We're in this together, right? Like that little word is very clever and purposeful.
See, that's one of my biggest pet peeves when they say, "What are we having?" Because the bartender isn't having anything with,
Yeah,
if
I guess here we might not. So I guess, he's cheerful, and I don't know if science would show one way or the other was better, but I think it worked there to me when I saw it. So that's interesting that for you, that's a no-no.
Right. The way I've seen it and kind of heard it explained by other folks, it comes in of you want to create the team atmosphere that we're all in it together. And I'm okay with people being friendly. Like, I'm not saying, we're against each other, but it puts this weird connotation of, well, hi, I'm John, your server. What are we all going to eat tonight? How are we doing tonight? Well, you already know how you, the server who is saying we,
right.
It's okay to acknowledge that we are a different group. How are you doing tonight? How are y'all doing?
Yeah.
That's totally fine.
I guess I hadn't thought about it that way. And I guess he carried it off so well.
Yeah.
That to me, but I could see where if you're going to copy that and you don't know how to pull it off, it's going to come across the wrong way. And also, it's a busy bar for lunch thing. It's not, you wouldn't do that. That would come across wrong at Commander's Palace for sure. Somebody would say to you, don't say that to the patrons, because they're them and you're you and you're not there together. That's true.
Right.
But this is a good example of thinking about, this isn't a waste of time to think about this and say, okay, is this appropriate? Is it not? When is it appropriate? This is the kind of active mind, that we have because we lived in that world. Whereas to a lot of people, they wouldn't even notice any of it. It would just be, oh, some guy showed up and gave me what I ordered, or they didn't do it, So
exactly. Just thinking through the common situations, and whether it's the blue ribbons or the 3 balloons, there wasn't a right answer for what Commander's Palace did. They just made a choice.
Yeah.
They figured out there's probably some experimentation, probably somewhere along the line they figured out, buy the cheapest balloons but spend money on the ribbon, or something like that.
Yeah.
And you just make the choice and you go on.
Yeah. Well, I will say, and this is something we'll put a link to in the show notes, that one of the things that I highly recommend is people watch the movie called Commanding the Table, which I believe is on Netflix.
And it's on Apple TV, and because we had talked about it, and unfortunately I still haven't watched it. It's on the queue for me to watch because I went digging around a few times on Netflix and couldn't find it, and said, well, heck, I'll watch whatever silly thing I ended up watching.
Okay, well, you'll watch it, but I do recommend that people check it out because it's about Commander's Palace and how the restaurant evolved, and it's important, and it's not just interesting, it's important in a couple of different dimensions, one of which is that Ella Brennan, who was the matriarch of Commander's Palace and became kind of the person who is best known for the success of all of the Brennan's related restaurants, because that was one, and there were others. She didn't know how to cook. She didn't know how to run a business. She got out of college and her brother said, look, we've got this restaurant. Why don't you go run it and figure it out? And she had to figure it all out. So that's one dimension. But a lot of it is about the management of a business and having vision. And that's what she had. She was the visionary, but she also wasn't a visionary who didn't pay attention to the details. She would pick up a napkin. She would, pick up water. She handled the restaurant as though it was her own dining room, but she expected other people to do most of that work, and they did. But how did they get to that point? Well, it's a very interesting story. And the story about how she encouraged Emeril Lagasse to go out on his own when he had become the premier chef at her restaurant, instead of saying, well, he's here, he's making me good money, and he's learned our system. Why would I want to replace him? Instead of thinking like that, she said, Emeril, the time has come for you to go, because you probably want to start your own restaurant. And if you don't, you should. And he was flabbergasted by that. So
right. It's just realizing her system. It's not that she didn't want an A player. That's why she had Emeril.
mm-hmm.
It's Emeril's star was too big for her, and it was going to upset. It was not Emeril's palace.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It didn't mean that she wasn't glad he was there and glad he got to make a name for him. But at the same time, when you have good people go out and do things, Emeril, I would imagine, still has a lot of good thoughts.
Yeah,
for Commander's
he
Palace.
does. Yeah, he talks about that. And so, yeah, treating people that work with you, and I'll use that word with instead of for, but the people who work with you, and treating them like you're as invested in their future as they would be, that pays huge dividends that are not obvious to many people, especially those who don't think like that. So that was one of the
100%.
Yeah,
I mean, a couple things on that is, I think about, look, I'm on my fourth law firm. I had 3 before I got to where I am now. I don't assume anybody will be with me until the day they die. I'd love for it to be that way, because they're great people, but things are going to show up. Kimmy, my associate, has already said there's a non-zero chance that she and her boyfriend end up leaving the state in a few years.
mm-hmm.
Now, my goal is to make sure, thankfully over the pandemic, it seems likely that it doesn't matter that she's here or there as
Mm-hmm.
much. But I want her to think about working here and say, I'm so glad we were here. That she doesn't have a question in her mind. It's appropriate to send these people back to me. If she goes and competes with me, if she were to open her own shop, think well enough that even if she leaves, for the clients she can't or shouldn't handle, she sends them back to me. That's what I want for everybody who works for me.
Yeah, I mean, having an abundance mindset where the pie will grow to fit everybody is not a small thing. It's huge. If you have a scarcity mindset, if you think that, somebody does something, it can affect you in a negative way, that over time is corrosive. It's not good. And yeah, I guess I saw that at Commander's Palace. And it is funny, like how many people after I left there, because to me, as I worked there, then I got in law school, I stopped working there, I'd go back there. And when I go back, I kind of look at it and see how it would change and what was going on. But then you start meeting these alumnus people who had worked at Commander's Palace, some of whom are in high levels of government office, senators, whatever. And they all speak glowingly of that experience, because it wasn't a small formative experience. It was a huge formative experience for everybody that worked there.
Right. And I still think about it. I still refer to it as us or the hotel, or where, I haven't worked in the Four Seasons since 2006. And I still think about it as us.
Mm-hmm.
Because I got treated well there. We got one of the benefits of being able to stay at other Four Seasons for free.
Mm-hmm.
In other properties. Like, please go see what you are providing on a daily basis, because it's important that you understand.
Right. Yeah. Well, so many lessons that we learned, and we could probably write a book if we both had time or inclination, which we may not, but
one of these years.
Yeah, one of these years, maybe we can just get the transcript and send it to somebody who'll write it for us. But it was a pleasure chatting, and I definitely want to do this again sometime down the future.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Ernie, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, same here.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find more info on us and get your free white paper on client service at 5starcounsel.com. You can get in touch with me at john@5starcounsel.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found and leave us a review wherever you can.